Hi, and welcome to Night Clerk Radio. This is episode 65, The Music of Doom. I'm your host, Ross, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Burke. And we are not on Mars fighting demons, but, well, maybe spiritually, on every level but physical, you might say. So, in this episode, we're going to be talking about the music of Doom. We've already covered the music of Quake, but it only makes sense to go with the forefather of Quake, Doom, which is certainly a more significant game culturally, and also the music just fucking it's pretty good music. It's not bad. It's not bad. We'll be talking about not just the music of both the original and the 2016 remake, but also, Doom culturally, and talk a little bit about its connection to hauntology, vis-a-vis nostalgia and brands and all that fun, unholy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited we get to talk about Doom because I like it, and doing Quake at the time made sense because the music is like industrial dark ambient. It did kind of make sense for the type of music that we were discussing on the show at the time. But yeah, I think we've evolved enough on the kind of stuff we talk about and how we talk about things. It does make sense to do Doom, partially because like trying to stick to a brand is dumb and you should just talk about what you want. Which is kind of also what I'm realizing after 2 years of doing this.
Yeah.
I guess almost 3, really.
Oof.
But
time, it keeps moving forward.
It does. Yeah, we recorded those first episodes fall of 2019.
Oh my God.
Good times, huh? Good times. Yeah, so Doom is, Doom has to be a game people know about, but it's the classic id shooter. First one came out in like 1993, really propelled the genre, all the Doom clones throughout the 90s. And just like, as with a lot of id stuff, whether or not it's good or bad, it was like a technical marvel. Yeah. For its time. Yeah. Most notably, what we're going to talk about today is the soundtrack. So there's really like 2 ways we can talk about this. We can talk about this per game because much like we typically do 2 albums, we're kind of going to do 2 games in some sense, but more of a cohesive discussion than like, here's game 1, stop, here's game 2, which is the 93 original, which I guess I'm already cheating because I'm going to fold Doom 2 into that because they came out just like a year or so apart. Yeah. And Doom 2 is actually the first one I played.
I don't remember which one I played. You say I never, for me, the first time I played Doom was actually at the public library. They had this meeting of called the Doom Club or something like that, where people who brought their computers to the library and just played Doom. And I was like, Mom, can you take me there? I want to check this out. And like, okay, and it was at the library. What could go wrong? So they couldn't get Deathmatch to work. But I got to play single player and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So
yeah, like I guess 11-year-old me, because it was 94 at that time. Like, yeah, I have a long history with Doom being my kind of the first shooter I played, but I just saw Doom 2 on a shelf at like, I think Sam's Club, like the warehouse bulk store. And I was just like, Dad, look at these demons. Can I get this? And my dad was like, that looks awesome. Let's get it.
Good dad.
And then we took it home. Yeah, we took it home. And then turns out I couldn't run it because I'm probably going to misremember, but I only had a 386 processor at the time. And the early one that did not have the math coprocessor.
Oh, no.
So it couldn't run Doom 2. So we had to go over to my friend's. His dad worked at IBM, so they had a 486.
Ooh.
Fancy. And that ran Doom. So I had to go to my friend's house to play my copy of Doom 2.
Amazing.
Good times.
Was that the full game or just the shareware version?
That was the full game. Yeah, I didn't know about the shareware stuff until later when I went to like a computer convention with my uncle. Yeah. And they're just discs of Doom. And like, it didn't occur to me because I was a kid and dumb that the 2 in Doom and that it was like a sequel. It didn't read it because it was like Roman numerals. And I was an idiot. And like, I just saw Doom. I was like, oh, Doom. I was like, how much is this? And the guy's like, they're free. They're just floppy disks of the first chapter. I was like, you guys are just giving away Doom? And like, yeah. That's how I played Doom 1.
Amazing. And I think one of the reasons why Doom exploded was because it was the first game that figured out the idea. Well, it figured out deathmatching, like it figured out like multiplayer. And that was obviously in the 90s. That was very hard to do. Like you had to do a LAN or like modem to modem connection, I think. But still, like the concept blew people away.
Oh, yeah.
And the shareware, of course, it already had numerous successes through Commander Keen, and then Wolfenstein was a major hit. But yeah, it became this cultural force, and it was the lead thing that cultural conservatives in the 90s railed against. That or Mortal Kombat, right? Like,
oh yeah. If you will permit me one more anecdotal digression about Doom. I also had for Doom 2 the like deathmatch strategy guide.
Ooh.
That was like this little like 6x9. It was a small book. And this was before like Medal of Honor or Call of Duty or anything. But Doom 2, I guess, had a co-op mode, if I remember correctly. Or this may have been deathmatch and team versus team. But the whole book was like military strategies for clearing a room as a team of 4.
Oh, wow.
Like it was entirely written of like, you have team member 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1 sweeps across to this corner and 2 sweeps across to this corner and then back around as 3 sweeps into this corner. And like, I was like, this is awesome. This is awesome. I never got to play Doom Deathmatch. I didn't get to play Deathmatch until Quake, but I just read that book over and over and over again about like clearing room tactics and stuff. I was a little, it's just so weird. It's so weird.
Yeah. People didn't know how to like sell computer, video game strategy guides. So like, yeah, back then I do have similar memories of a different book, but like it wasn't for Doom. It was a book on wargaming. And I was just like, oh my God, this is like describing what wargaming's could do and like what the history of it was. I was like, oh man, this looks so neat. And I never played a historical war game. Like even to this day, I've never played like a Hex and Caterwad, which is, unrelated to Doom, but like reading strategy guides for things you'll never play.
The original.
Yeah. The original hauntology, haunted by games you won't play. But yeah, so like Doom also, like the 93 Doom sort of represents a lot of like computer game design and the computer game industry in the 90s, and that they're still figuring everything out, at least the technology. The technology is advancing so rapidly that that's all the people who make the games can handle is just progressing the technology. Like the technological differences between Wolfenstein 3D and then Doom are vast, but still like they put everything else sort of at the background. And, the plot, John Carmack famously compared the plots of video games to the plots of porn movies. But like this also applies to the music, even though the music was put on highly technical restraints. So the book I read is called Doom Scary Dark Fast, although that's all is one word, by Dan Pinchbeck, and he has a whole chapter talking about the music. The music was composed by Bobby Prince, who had collaborated with id on previous games like Commander Keen and Wolfenstein. And they talk in great detail about like you had to get all the data for the music in like a certain file size. And so you had to like down to like taking out individual chords in order to make the data fit. You couldn't just dump in, uncompressed WAV files or anything like that. Like you had very highly technical restraints of what kind of sounds you could make. And Bobby had to work with that. Now Doom was more generous than Wolfenstein in some ways, but like it was still like the game's got to fit on like a very small disk. It's got to have a very small file size, and it has to do this and this. It's amazing that the soundtrack became so iconic, even though it was made under like it was like, oh yeah, we'll have a guy make music. Oh, we'll just hire him from some bulletin board system, and oh, he's doing pretty well. We'll just keep him because like John Carmack and Romero and all the other lead people at id were just focused on the technology of the doing 3D and the level design and like having cool action and not like giving a shit about anything else. Well, I mean, like giving a shit, but like not clearly. It's like I said, it's like afterthought. Like, oh, we need some music, but it's not like the major concern.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess because they had worked with him previously is why they went with Bobby Prince. But that section, which is chapter 6 of the book you were talking about, is fascinating, where he talks about, like you were saying, the file size limit. He's like, I think it's about 5 bytes per note. So I have to like go through and like revoice chords to get as close to what I want, but with fewer notes. And another interesting, like annoying, he also did all the sound effects and audio design. And you have to make sure that it syncs up. So he would have to like give them something with a timing John Carmack would have to recompile and rebuild Doom and then load up a part with that sound effect, check it. Bobby Prince would have to take notes, go back, try to fix it, and like work on getting it the right timing as soon as possible, like in as few builds as possible, because you have to like wait to rebuild your software every time you want to like change all your sound effects timings.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I mean, the sound design of Doom for the time is also pretty iconic. Like, I think we're mostly going to talk about the music. There's a lot of stuff that like is still in my memory. Like, you know, there's the Cyber Demons, which was the big dog you do with the rocket launcher hand. He's like half cyborg, half Hell Prince or whatever. And like, yeah, that stomping and rocket sound is like terrifying to 11-year-old me.
Oh, yeah.
Just incredibly heavy and pounding for only having something like 8 MIDI channels or whatever to work with.
Yeah.
Which I guess is for the music. I don't know actually about the technical limitations of a given sound effect.
Yeah. I have seen, like, I've watched some stuff about the people who work with tracking software, you know, back in the day. And they talk, you know, they're basically, you know, making music with the most technical limitations. And like a lot of them became full on video game composers for like all kinds of systems and stuff like that. Some of them are still working to this day. You know, like they started like back in the 80s, they're still working. But like it reminds me of that, like having to make interesting music with these very, very technical limitations. Also, the sound effects, for me, the thing I associate with Doom more than anything else isn't even a monster sound effect. It's the sound of the doors. The door opening.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, the door, which is mentioned in this book. You know, Doom's famous doors, which have become so iconic, the sound even appeared in a recent Doctor Who episode, are audible even from the far side of levels. I mean, the Doom designers did actually use sound effects, at least, as a game design element, which is, of course, a good idea. But like, yeah, the Doom, like every time I hear it, because it has become or is a stock sound effect. And so like hundreds of TV shows and movies and other things have used it. And every time I hear it, it's like, it's the Doom door. I recognize that. It's like my Willem scream, my personal Willem scream.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you hear it in movies all the time, especially like cheap sci-fi movies. Like if they're on a space station or in a lab or something, you still hear that Doom door.
I want to say that last Bruce Willis corridor sci-fi movie we watched had that sound effect. I was like, what a piece of trash.
Another one I feel like I hear a lot are the Pinkies, the demons, the on all fours.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think their grunts and growls comes up a lot when you need like an animal noise.
That's true.
In a movie.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard that one a lot.
Yeah. So, yeah, Bobby Prince, who basically was a lawyer, got into music composing on, you know, computers, and then, you know, got hired by id because he liked Commander Keen. Like in an interview, he talks about, he's like, hey, I played that Commander Keen game you guys you did. That's pretty neat. He's like, well, this guy's obviously right for our office. You're hired. The soundtrack is basically, in a lot of ways, a Plunderphonics album. Because Bobby Prince, like, he composed original stuff for it, but he also famously borrowed from Pantera and Slayer and Black Sabbath and Metallica, and just they like their metal for Doom. Bobby Prince, he says, is like, I wanted more ambient, I wanted to be more atmospheric, and there are certainly atmospheric and ambient and like you know spoopy tracks, but man. Like, that's not what people associate with Doom, the original soundtrack. I actually re-listened to it in preparation for this episode. And yeah, it's a lot of MIDI metal.
Yeah. And it's interesting because a little bit of that is, I don't want to say disputed, but some of the tracks that people say are attributed to other tracks, Bobby Prince claims they're not, which is, you know, who knows, right? But there's on the Quarter Circles blog, there's a little interview with Bobby Prince from 2020, I think right around when Doom Eternal came out, probably. And it's a really quick read. But one thing was interesting to me are really two things. One is that he still writes, like he's retired, but he ghostwrites a bunch of music. Or for example, he says he really likes the theme music, which is one that people say sounds like a bunch of different metal songs, but he claims he wrote it before the id guys had introduced him to a lot of that music. Kind of interesting. I guess we'll never really know.
Yeah.
Because there was never any like legal action, right? It was not really a thing that ever actually came up, right?
Yeah.
Like Pantera didn't go like, hey, there's like 4 tracks off Vulgar Display of Power in your game.
Yeah, the Doom Wiki, what you found, the musical inspiration behind Doom's music. It is known developing Doom's music, Bobby Prince had a small collection of heavy metal CDs given to him by John Romero. They were used as inspiration for covers. In 2007, some of Doom's unused music tracks were released by John Romero, and metadata comments in those files name the tracks that inspired them. So... yeah, I would say covers is a pretty good, because like they're not identical. Like you could tell like there are significant differences in part because of the technology, right? Like it's a MIDI, not like actual instruments. And it's a very limited version of MIDI compared to what we have now. Like, you know, the limits of 1993 technology that can fit in a very small file size. And Bobby Prince mentioned in the interview, oh, yeah, I turn off the soundtrack for a lot of times when I play games. Like, it's just stuff to loop forever and won't drive the player insane. That was my main goal, was to make, not to drive them insane.
It's also easy when every Doom level is like under 5 minutes, too.
I mean, some Doom levels, some of the later ones get into real, like, hitting switches and
running back and forth.
Yeah, trying to figure this shit out. That was, I think, more of a Doom 2 feature than Doom 1. But yeah, same thing. But like, it's amazing that it became so iconic and so formative for so many people, right? Like, we've already talked about Master Boot Record, and obviously that was a big influence on him. And just like a whole generation of metalheads was raised because of Doom. I think, how many kids were introduced to heavy metal through these MIDI tunes?
Yeah. And you still hear like E1M1 referenced all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which is like probably the iconic song that everyone knows from the first Doom.
Yeah. If you play those opening chords like that, it's like, oh, it's Doom. Yeah.
I don't know. Like the plunderphonic side of it is interesting, but it actually, upon doing research, because I kind of forget how long Doom is and how many levels it has, because it is of that era of like 30 levels, Actually, a wide variety of the soundtrack, at least not directly attributable to anything, which I kind of thought was interesting. And the other thing I thought was interesting was the range of genre representation, because you really just do think of those iconic metal air quotes covers, whatever you want to call them. But there is a lot of like interesting ambient stuff in there, especially given, like we said before, the technical limitations, because I think you said he had something like 8 tracks to work with. And I don't know how that compares to contemporary like consoles, because this is getting into like the Super Nintendo 16-bit era. But I know on NES, I think they only had like 4 channels for the NES music. It was like 2.
Oh, yeah.
It was like 2 saw waves, a square wave, and a static channel or something. And the static was your drums, which are why Nintendo drums sound the way they do. Because it's just like a static blip to be a snare drum. Yeah. If I remember correctly. Yeah. So moving to 8 is maybe closer to what they have on console.
I mean, like Doom didn't make the jump to consoles until like the N64, I believe. Sometime.
Well, there's the Sega Genesis 32X version.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But that was kind of around the same time. Yeah. So it was like how they dragged it out. I was less thinking about Doom on consoles, but more compared to what other people were doing, because there are also a lot of like iconic console soundtracks from this era. I guess I was just casually speculating or being curious about the technical differences of what was available to each set of composers.
You make a good point about, we remember the metal, but like there's other type of music, like in the Quarter Circles interview you referenced earlier. My favorite bit is that, well, my next favorite is the Healer Stocks song. That's one of my favorites because it's got a Latin beat into it. It was inspired by the first time I saw the animation of the Healer. The long legs were animated like he was doing a Latin dance. But I love that. Like it was like, well, it looks like he's doing a Latin dance. I'm going to put a Latin song to that. He's going to dance. Yeah, like it's just like it's again, and no one said, well, that's not thematically consistent with Doom. It's not, for the brand. It's just like, yeah, sure, okay, do whatever you want. Like it's fine. Yeah, yep, it's good enough. Throw it in there. We got to meet a deadline, That's right. Yeah. Which is interesting because it's this weird mix of like, well, whatever, throw it in there. But also due to technological limitations, so much had to be done manually that like you could not half-ass it and have it be like even remotely playable. So it's like this weird blend of extreme effort, but also I think knowing when stuff doesn't matter, which is an important skill that a lot of people develop, of like how to actually focus your effort on things and triaging your time. It's like an interesting lesson in that regard. The last thing about 93 that I thought was interesting, and I didn't go looking for them, but it sounds like from some of these books and articles that Bobby Prince actually delivered
like dozens and dozens of songs, and Romero kind of pick and chose them at the last minute. That's kind of the vibe I got from Scary Dark Fest, is that, he handed off a bunch of stuff to them. But yeah, so on page 53 of the Scary Dark Fest, placement of the music fell to Romero, with the result that a significant number of the tracks in Doom were never really intended for the final product or placeholders.
That could explain the covers. Like why, Romero had a bunch of metal CDs. Bobby was okay, I'll put these in the MIDI form so you have something to use. And then it's like, oh, well, that's going in the final game, huh? I was going to do something original. You just needed something now. Okay. Yeah.
I didn't think you were shipping that, but fine.
Okay.
You got it. But these sort of technical limitations, if you don't have anything else to say about the 93 Doom, I think these technical limitations kind of serve as an interesting contrast to, I guess it's too soon to say it's iconic, but sort of received as iconic. Mick Gordon soundtrack for the 2016 Doom reboot, relaunch, whatever you want to call it. The 2016, which was an awesome game.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting because now here we are in the 2010s. We have all kinds of new technology available to us, and you get such a resultingly like more interesting soundtrack. So I don't know what you feel like talking about first. Like there's a really great 1 hour talk with Mick Gordon they did at the Game Developers Conference, GDC, about how he made all the music and kind of the development process and the iterative process. And it is really interesting that what they thought they wanted at the start and what they ended up with. So like you said, that the first sort of project draft or template or there's some technical term, but like basically the original composition agreement was like, we want synths and no guitar. Because guitar, Mick Gordon said, had become like synonymous with cheesy metal or like cheap soundtracks. And I think the people, I guess that was still id, Bethesda, whatever. They're like, yeah, we don't really want that. We want it to be like synths. So a lot of the first work and the bulk of the soundtrack is synth, where he developed like this detailed chaining system where you had like 4 sets of multiple pedals and effects. And you just fed like sine waves, so like pure notes through them, and just turned the knobs until you got something like weird and interesting because all the effects are like bouncing off themselves. And he called that his Doom instrument. And he does demos of what this sounds like, of like, here's just a tone. Here's like a 440 hertz A or whatever. And then here I'm going to run it through this. And it just turns into like this demonic nonsense. But then as the production went on, they kind of decided like, it's like missing something. It's not as gritty. It's not as like violent music as Doom should be. And he's like, well, that's because you want guitar. So he just recorded some guitar tracks and added to what became a lot of the iconic songs from 2016, like Rip and Tear is the big one everyone uses in memes and references and stuff.
Yeah.
And he did it with these like high string count guitars. So a typical guitar is 6 strings, but there are like 7, 8, and even 9 strings. And they add progressively deeper strings. So beyond like the deep A string or E string, sorry, they add more strings to the point where a 9 string is actually overlapping with the highest string, I think on like a 5 string bass, if I remember correctly. So like it's a guitar that almost gets into bass land. And you run it through enough effects, and that's how you get that deep, like really, really deep sounds, because deeper notes just sound aggressive to us. And that's a thing that goes back to metal, where even on a 6 string, before like 7 and 8s were widely available, people would do what's called drop D or drop C tuning, where you tune your low E string down to a D or a C, and that changes all your chords. But it makes everything sound like deep and aggressive. So like a lot of metal that people listened to at the time was in like drop D tuning. But there's only so low you can tune a string before it just doesn't like vibrate and resonate well and sound good. So that's why they just added more strings to guitars eventually.
Wow.
But then to make it kind of hide that it was a guitar, he ended up using some plugin called Morph, which he says he doesn't know how it works, but I assume it's some sort of like style transfer algorithm, which is what's used when you say like, give me a version of Starry Night as if it was drawn by the Animaniacs or whatever, and he basically convolved the guitar sound with the sound effect for the chainsaw from the original Doom.
Okay.
And that's why all the guitar in 2016 is all like weird and rippy and doesn't quite sound like guitar. I'm not really doing his talk justice. It's a little longer than it has to be because he spends a lot of time telling bad jokes, to be frank. Yeah, it's really fascinating of him going through like, here's what the first version of this I made. It just sounds okay to like the final product is really fascinating. That journey in development.
Wow.
In terms of using modern technology. And I thought it was impressive because, they often talk about in general, like the idea of like creativity comes from limits, which is one of the problems now is you're not really limited, right? Like one of the examples he gave is when way back in the time, this is not Doom related, when David Bowie was recording the song Heroes, they only had a few tracks. They didn't have enough tracks to do all the vocal layering that they wanted to do. So they basically in studio made a basically analog like reverb machine they had a microphone and David Bowie would sing into it. And the thing in Heroes is that the verses are sung quieter than the chorus and the bridge and stuff because the song gets more energetic. But then halfway across the studio and like on the other side of the studio, they put 2 more microphones, but had them set to gates so they don't pick stuff up until he starts singing louder. So it all gets fed into like one track, but the other microphones don't turn on and pick up the reverb until later. So it's like analog side chaining almost.
Wow.
And that was the kind of stuff he's like, but now I can just kind of do whatever. I can just drag a plug-in, into my DAW and I don't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah.
So you have to find new ways. If you really want to, you have to find new ways to be creative.
Yeah.
In a limitless world.
So it's like the evolution of working under these, Bobby Prince had his challenge was working with massive technical limitations. And now it's doing something that is still creative with access to all these tools. So you have to really bend and twist and think of a novel way to use them in order to make a new sound. And that's kind of the challenge. So that's an interesting evolution of just the creative process in a nutshell. Because, like every art form now with digital tools can do so much more. But like now the challenge is, can you do something that's actually will be interesting and worth, looking at or listening to? Wow. No, that's really cool. Also, he was not just somebody they found on a bulletin board. BVS, like,
of course,
he's a veteran video game composer who worked on mini games before. From the stuff I saw of him, he's just, obviously a very highly skilled composer, able to play a lot of instruments, and just has a massive, $50,000 worth of gear, tens of thousands of dollars worth of gear in his bedroom. And he's able to create, or his, home office or whatever. I remember seeing the video where he shows off this Soviet era synthesizer and he doesn't speak Russian, but he figured it out and he plugged it into his keyboard and fed it in there and just to perform this kind of audio alchemy on these tracks to make them sound really, Doom. It's really cool stuff. I mean, it's kind of emblematic of like the change of how like games video games have changed, back in the 90s, technology's evolving rapidly. And that's all that it is, enough people in an office trying to keep up with technology and trying to just do something. Like Doom in some ways is just a tech demo. It's just like, here, we got the Doom engine to work and here's what the video game can do now. It could never do it before, but now it can. Plot hell on Mars. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
You're soldier man.
You're Marine guy. You're the Doom guy. Yeah. Don't worry about it. But like by 2016, by the time the Doom remake came out, or sequel, whatever you want to call it, the new Doom, the technology's matured quite a bit. And like, there's still innovations, but they're incremental. They're not like revolutionary. Like the differences between Wolfenstein 3D and, 1993 Doom are very big and obvious. But like the differences between, the FPSs that came out a year before or 2 years before Doom 2016 and 2016 are not like that noticeable. Like, I mean, there are certainly differences, but like, it's not the same, right? Like, it's not generational.
No.
Yeah. But because of these technologies, they're so like expensive. You can't just have like the Doom's budget is probably a couple million, right? It's to pay for one office building full of programmers and designers and, people. Now, I mean, Doom's, any video game, AAA video game title is like equal to a major Hollywood movie in production, hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions at a minimum. And they need to make that money back. And so you have to make Doom. Doom can't just be a game. It has to be a brand. Like, it's amazing technical wizardry, but now you can't just have, oh, how about an invasion on Mars? And just come with some batshit concept and just go with it. It's well, that's what the original brand was. So we had to do that. But now we have to build out lore so we can do sequels and DLC and side games and mobile games and other products. Yeah.
Shitty movies.
Yeah. The shitty movie was, that was a delightful thing.
Both.
Yeah.
Both.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone forgets the second Doom because it's a non-movie. Like there's the classic Carl Urban rock one, which if you're into dumb bad stuff, you don't take it too seriously. It's at least funny to watch. Like, oh man, people made this. But then there's the Doom one from like 2019. I don't actually remember the subtitle for it. Doom Annihilation. Mm-hmm. That's it. Is just a nothing. Mm-hmm. Like nothing happens. They just kind of walk around and like one imp shows up and it's like, ugh, how do you make Doom boring? That's truly impressive.
I remember watching like the trailer for it. And it was on Netflix for a while, and I was like, it's not. Mm-hmm. I have a Netflix subscription. This is not worth my time. It does not grab my attention. Yeah,
I know Max. I think Max and I watched it, or maybe he watched it for Good Brews, Bad Views, and then Caleb and I watched it separately. But it does speak into that, like, oh, we just have this Doom brand. Let's just make anything like people like anything. If you just put Doom on it, and it's like. Got to stop that because like you're saying, that even comes up a little bit in the soundtrack in the hour talk that Mick Gordon does, where he talks about like, how do you make it sound like Doom? You got to capture the Doom brand in your music. So there is like references where certain songs use like the same notes from E1M1, but like slightly different and stuff. I don't know. Like it does get into this part where all art feels transactional. Just like not new or noticed, but when it hits something like Doom, when brands and corporations can't even leave Doom alone, which is literally just run around and shoot things. I don't know.
And we have to get into the history of the Doom Slayer and all the backstory and like
and
Doom.
Here's actually
and Doom Eternal, the sequel to the 2016 Doom, is like way worse about all the lore. Like, I mean, there's just
I guess we skipped over it, and because I said we're going to talk about two games by line, but even this is in Doom 3. Doom 3 has like story. I remember the first time I played it, just be like, no, stop making me talk to people. Like, I don't care. Like,
oh, that's like right.
Doom and Doom 2 starts off. You're just in a room. You open the next door. There's zombie soldiers. You start shooting them. You're just like, oh, well, boom. We got to shoot these people now.
I totally forgot about that
Doom
game.
3 is like, this is why the corporation's on Mars. And these are the scientists, and you got to go talk to this guy, and then go talk to the security chief and get your gun and your PDA, and then access your PDA to get your mission objective to walk over and talk to the general.
Yep.
And you have to this and like try to do this big exploring atmospheric stuff, but like not every game has to be Half-Life. Sometimes you can just shoot things.
Yeah, I totally forgot about Doom 3 because like that was the game famously where you couldn't hold a gun and a flashlight at the same time.
Which they changed for the remaster.
Like, yeah, that became the joke. Yeah, I actually beat that game and I've forgotten about it. Yeah. God, I do remember there was, I can't remember the song now, but there was a drum and bass album that sampled like the evil scientist speech in one of the tracks. So I could, there's a time where I could quote that speech just because I listened to that album enough, but that was years ago. So yeah, like that's the thing is like every work, like the original Doom is obviously like a work of art because they knew what would work and what wouldn't. And like on a sort of like intuitive level because they like, fighting demons with sci-fi elements. Oh man, that's fucking cool. Like they went with that instinct rather than just like trying to focus group it or engineer it to be, they knew what they liked and they made it. And it was the kind of art that they wanted to have in the world. So they made it. That's very cool. But like now the Doom 2016 thing that was engineered and focus group and like it is art in its own way, but like it's become something to be a revenue base for a major corporation and is a corporate asset in a way that I think like the original Doom was obviously a corporate asset too. I don't know. It's just seeing everything becoming more and more like it's, I guess, the commodification of every piece of art. Like it shows how the original one still was unsophisticated. And now the commodification has become more and more sophisticated over the years. but art still peeks through. Like Mick Gordon's work is genuinely brilliant. And like, we haven't even talked about the other technical innovation of the Doom 2016 stuff, which what you were really hype about, which was the dynamic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. There are kind of two things on the technical side that we hadn't talked about yet. One I should have mentioned earlier because it's a little out of place now, but I feel like if I don't say it, someone's going to like comment and be like, also, did you know? Two things. One, going back a bit unrelated, when doing the sound design and the soundtrack design, Mick Gordon found a plugin that can embed images like in the spectrogram of a piece of music, right? Mm-hmm. He basically left all these like Easter eggs in the Doom soundtrack where if you put the track into like Audition or Audacity or whatever, and you bring up like a spectrogram for the track, there's like pentagrams and 666 and stuff in there, which people were like, oh, look, this is about your allegiance to Satan and stuff. But to counteract that, he also put in some tracks, there's hidden where, God, I forget exactly how he did it, but he basically hid part of the message in the left track and part of the message in the right track. So you'd only hear it if you replayed it in mono, I think. So like if you mix down it into mono and then reverse it, it says like Jesus loves you, I think is what he put in there for people to find. So a little bit, both sides. But what you're referencing, sorry for the little digression, but I just wanted to include it because it's interesting and came up in the reading. But the other thing that was an interesting technical accomplishment for the 2016 Doom is the use of music as not just playing in the background, but as like a dynamic element where the music responds to player actions and is separated out into its own thing that gets processed as needed. So like, depending on how much you're moving, how much danger you're in, how many enemies are in the room, like there's that type of stuff, which is kind of obvious sounding, but it works really well. Doom 2016 has a mechanic called Glory Kill, where if you wound a monster enough, they start glowing and they press a button, you can kind of like one-shot them in like a fancy, gruesome way.
Kind of like a Mortal Kombat execution fatality.
Yeah, but it has certain bonuses, like they drop more ammo and you can get perks to like restore life and stuff when you do it. So there is like extra music that would like stack on itself and evolve if you chain together more and more glory kills and whatnot. So you have these like what he called looping rises, where you have just like a particular thing called a shepherd tone, which he didn't really elaborate on. I think it's like a musical concept or a certain way of constructing frequency into perceived pitch, he called it. So like you get this kind of endless, like MC Escher, but sonically like endless rise.
Nice.
Kind of the soundtrack as you loop together more and more glory kills.
Damn.
So there's all these like also kind of cool dynamic effects that came in. I think are at least worth mentioning. Like they're interesting ideas of using technology to make something more interesting instead of just phoning in like a little sound effect sting or something.
So according to Wikipedia, a shepherd's tone is a sound consisting of a superposition of sine waves separated by octaves. When played with a bass pitch, if the tone moving upward or downward is referred to as a shepherd's scale. This creates the auditory illusion of a tone that seems to continually ascend or descend in pitch, which ultimately gets no higher or lower. A musical barber's pole. That's how it's been described as. So
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I really, but to go back to like dynamic music, like I really am intrigued by this idea because on one way, it like deconstructs the idea of like the album as this like, a music's a soundtrack for a game is a concrete part of music, that's this many tracks, this long, and it is played in this, but like the music that every single player of Doom experiences is slightly different. No, there is no like there is a soundtrack, but that's a separate thing from the actual game's soundtrack because it varies because of how you play it. So obviously there are infinite number of like cool ideas you could do with this of, with the right software and technology, you could like create soundtracks for a location that change based on time of day, for example, or, like for an art installation piece or like even for your home. But like, on the other hand, of course, obviously this uses like, kind of like AI software and advanced programming that I could just see like, well, who needs musicians? It's like art generation. We can just generate a soundtrack and we don't have to pay anyone because I can just push a button and have a thing. Or, scam artists will you hit the music AI generator and be like, oh, yeah, and just upload albums in mass to Bandcamp,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like there's really cool ideas with it, but like it's just going to get commodified. I mean, and there's some good, there's some bad, but like I really want to see more interesting things done with it. Like part of it reminds me of like how like, even back in Left 4 Dead, like there is an AI director that controls the game's tempo and flow based on how the players are doing. So this is just like an evolution of that progress.
Yeah. Another good example of that is Alien Isolation, which has like multiple subsystems based on the game difficulty that you set to control like how aware the alien is of you and its environment. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. I've heard that the AI for that alien is extremely.
Yeah, it's got like multiple subsystems that make it feel, again, depending on game difficulty, like more or less realistic or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I've seen some gameplay videos where the alien outwitted the player. Even though the player would try and like fake it out, on the advanced difficulties, it's extremely hard to fool. And yeah, no, like it's, in one sense inspiring to see like these incredibly technical accomplishments and like create really cool music and art. But on the other hand, it's just like the only people that have the money for it are only going to, be extremely conservative with it and only okay projects that are like safe bets. Like we're not going to see like the same kind of mindset that led to the original Doom because the Doom was just like some dudes like, hey, wouldn't this be cool? Like it'd be like our D&D campaign with miniguns and we could do a big fucking gun in it and it'd be awesome, and like that kind of spirit. Certainly, but maybe as these tools become cheaper, like there are more bedroom composers who may not necessarily have Mick Gordon's level equipment, but they could do something comparable. But like,
oh, sure. I mean, the Undertale, that he wrote all that music himself.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Undertale is, actually a good counterexample because like that game was Kickstarted for only like 10 grand or something like that. And then it became Undertale by Toby Fox, $51,000.
What was the asking? What was the goal?
I don't know what the goal, 5,000. So, yeah. And his last stretch goal was at 45,000. So it did pretty well for itself, and
probably less than like Mick Gordon made per track.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's probably not true, but still.
But also Toby Fox is also working like in homage to earlier, like more technically limited video game systems, right? Like he's doing like this 8-bit or 16-bit kind of systems, and like his composing is very much in that chiptune like aesthetic, and because he finds that, I guess, more. Well, I mean, he's also doing because he's referencing the whole generation of video game RPGs, commenting on them. So it makes sense aesthetically. It'll be really interesting to see if Toby Fox like goes beyond or changes, if he stays in this 8-bit era or if he like changes. But like he's staying inside a very technically limited like format as an aesthetic choice, not because he has to.
Right.
I mean, that's something for a separate episode. It's talking about like how early generations of video games are only like a couple years, like the Wolfenstein, to Doom, to, Quake. And now those have become like video game generations and things to emulate. Yeah. Like there's all these retro shooters that emulate Quake 1, like Dusk.
Doom to Half-Life was 4 years.
Oh my God, was it?
I think so. 93 to 97.
Jesus. Yeah. Wow. And like, but now, things have slowed down. Like we don't have those 4-year, video games 4 years ago look pretty similar to what they do now. So yeah, stuff to think about. But yeah, Doom, it's neat. Go kill some demons. Thank you for listening for this slightly longer than usual episode. Our next episode, we're going to be going. It is the spoopy time of year, so we're going to be talking about the scariest thing in the world: clowns. and specifically clowncore and high effort memes. You know, what happened when talented musicians shitpost musically as one way to look at it. Thanks for everyone who's listening. If you haven't already, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/nightclerkradio. We'll have some new rewards. We're working on them now, but of course we have a lot of bonus episodes where we talk about a lot of cool stuff. And if you want to talk to us online, we are at Night Clerk Radio on Twitter. I am at Ross Payton. Burke is at Burke McBurkinson. We have a website, nightclerkradio.com, Facebook page. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever you listen to podcasts to, and tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell acquaintances about us. And we'll talk to you later as we shoot demons on Mars.